Okay, here we are again, streaming. Yeehaw. Make sure my mic is working okay. Looks like it's doing good. And let me pop something up real quick. All right. Hey, Corn, how you doing? So today, I got a bunch of stuff in. Most of it from work, some of it for me. And I wanted to talk a bit about cameras, microphones, and different ways of connecting stuff up to a streaming system so that you can improve the overall quality of your stream. For example, right now I am looking at, or you're seeing me through my generic Logitech webcam. Mine's actually a C925, but it's more or less the same as a C920. And I'm using this mic here, my MXL 990. And the audio, it's okay. It's pretty good. It's about as good as you're going to get without spending a fortune. The video, on the other hand, not so much. It took me quite a bit of work to get it to the state that it's in. So I kind of wanted to start off with cameras because people ask me about, cameras for various things. We obviously have our standard gaming streamers who a C920 or other webcam works fine. But then again, they're just a little window up in the corner or the bottom corner or something like that. Maybe they have a green screen and, it's not that big of a deal. Then you have a lot of your just chatting streamers. You have your maker streamers, your artist streamers. Oh yeah, you'll see plenty of grain from the camera, and that's something that you're going to see pretty consistently. We'll touch on that though, and why that is. We have all these different types of streamers that want to capture content, and here I am. I'm in my studio. I have the overhead light on. I have some various LED lights on, and actually I can turn on another one here, and it might actually help with the grain a little. And it's great, but you can actually see that, these webcams are autofocus cameras, so you'll see it hunt for focus from time to time. You'll see quite a bit of grain, and you'll also notice that sometimes it gets a little fuzzy around the outer edge. And, overall, they serve their purpose, but they're not great for content providers. If I turn all these lights off, this camera is going to start bumping up the ISO, basically amplifying the light signals that the sensor is getting, and that's going to increase the image grain. Hey Leo, how you doing? So, what options do we have beside the webcam? Well, the first thing that comes to mind that everyone always says is, hey, thanks. I need to get a DSLR. This is a mirrorless camera, but it's more or less the same as a DSLR. You can get, a Sony, a Panasonic, a Fuji, a, Nikon, what have you. There's a ton of different brands out there of DSLRs. The problem is with DSLRs and mirrorless is that they're expensive. This camera right here, when it was new, was $1,200 with the lens. this camera, by the way, won't even work for streaming because it doesn't provide HDMI out for video. But it's also quite a bit older. It's a Fujifilm X-E1. But, you know, these are nice, but they're also bulky and heavy. And, you know, if I switch over to another scene here, this is off of my Fuji X-T3. And you can see the picture's quite a bit clearer. It's going to look a little washed out because I have this light on. If I turn it off, it's actually going to look a little bit better. But you'll still see it hunting for focus from time to time. But this camera, conversely, you know, is a couple $1,000s when you factor in the camera body, the camera lens, and any necessary accessories. You know, you're going to have the HDMI cable, the capture card, all that. So DSLRs are pretty common for, you know, the next step up. And I'm not sure if it's really the next step up. I think that there might be an option in the middle. But before we get to that, you know, let's talk about the difference between a DSLR mirrorless and a webcam. So let's switch back to my webcam. I'm going to bring my mic back over. And come on, headphones. There we go. I'm going to pull up a web browser and let's switch to display capture. All right, this is the Logitech webpage, you know, for the C920. You've seen it, I've seen it, we've all seen it. It's pretty much your standard de facto streamer webcam. One thing that's interesting about that is, why is it so noisy? Why is it hard to get really nice images out of it? You know, and why does, even though it says it's 1080p, why does it lose so much detail? Well, that has to do with what it's like on the inside. So if we take this thing apart that's only, you know, 3 inches wide or so, it's got this PC board in here. It's got, let's see if we can zoom this in a little. 2 microphones. It has one here and one here for your stereo separation. And really, that's the main reason why the camera is so big, is just to make sure you have stereo microphones. As streamers, we typically don't even use that mic because we want something better. But here in the middle, that's where the meat of it is, our camera and lens module. These lenses are typically plastic, and they're typically 1/4 inch, maybe 5-6 millimeters in size, maybe a little bit bigger. Needless to say, not big. And even more so when we go down, we've got our image sensor here. And our image sensor, bus signal noise isn't really too big of a deal. It's a digital signal. That's less of a factor than you think, Corn. Twitch is auto-recording it. I might upload it to YouTube. So you have this sensor here, and that sensor is really, really tiny. Really tiny. You know, it's really just a little bit bigger than the one you have on your cell phone. You know, and yes, you can use your cell phone as a camera for streams, and I'll cover that in a minute. So on this little tiny, maybe 1/4 inch diagonal piece of silicone that is your image sensor, you have 2.1 megapixels, 2.1 million pixels. So that's 2.1 million little buckets that light goes into to detect what the image actually is. So those buckets are going to be really, 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 really tiny. So they're not going to be able to pick up as much light as they would if they were bigger, you know, because your photons shoot across the room, hit the light sensor, and, you know, once that bucket's full, that bucket's full. And if that bucket is only, you know, a couple nanometers wide, it's going to pick up much less light than, you know, something that's a few nanometers wide or a couple dozen nanometers wide. I mean, it's a lot of crazy small stuff going on in this image sensor. You know, so we've got really two things working against a webcam from the get-go. We've got the sensor size, and we've got the plastic lens. These plastic lenses also tend to be fixed focal length. Not great. So you can't just zoom in optically to improve picture quality. You can zoom in digitally, but your digital zoom is really just cropping the image and blowing it up. So you're not actually adding detail. You're reducing the number of pixels on the screen. So when we look at our sensor size, Wikipedia actually has this nice image on image sensor format article, and it talks about the various sensor sizes. So your old 35 millimeter frame from your camera is going to be this blue box here. When you see full frame on a camera, that's what it means. It's using a 35 millimeter diagonal frame. If you want to spend $2,000+ on a camera body plus all that money on a lens, you can get something like that. And they make really nice images. And those buckets to collect the light are much higher. Bigger buckets means less noise at higher ISOs, exposures. APS-H isn't really used much anymore. It was used on a lot of Canon 1 series cameras. But the APS-C, and you'll actually see that there's a couple variations here. These are what you're going to see on a lot of your DSLRs and mirrorless cameras. And you can see that's quite a bit bigger. So how does a webcam compare to that? Well, its sensor is so small it doesn't even show on this chart. But this green square down here in the corner, a webcam's sensor typically is 1/4, you know, the size of this green square. So it's not going to be as sensitive. It's not going to be able to provide as good of an image as a DSLR or a mirrorless camera. I don't care how expensive your webcam is. I don't care if you've got this C920. I don't care if you have this AverMedia. You know, I don't care if you have the Razer Cam. If that sensor size is going to be small, it's not going to be able to provide as much detail. And it's definitely going to require more light because there's less area to pick up that light. So that's great, but, you know, DSLRs are expensive. Well, there's got to be something in the middle there. So in my day job, we deal with video cameras that get installed permanently in rooms for recording meetings and other things. And we use cameras kind of like this Marshall Electronics little mini box camera. Matter of fact, you'll also see box cameras much like this, which this is a IP camera, but this is a full box camera. You can see it's about the size of my hand. And if I put it up beside a DSLR, you'll notice that the camera is just overall different shaped, and it's got a tiny little lens, whereas this has a big honking lens. These guys typically will have a 1/3 inch image sensor. It's not quite as big as an SLR, not quite as big as a Micro Four Thirds, but it is infinitely better than your webcams. So it's going to be somewhere around the size of this green box. So it's going to provide quite a bit more detail. But another thing about this is you have interchangeable optics. You know, I can actually take this lens off the camera. Yes, you are correct, Corn. The GoPro is not as good, but I can take the lens off this camera and change it out for a different one. These cameras can also have much more processing capability in them. So your webcam is actually pretty dumb. It's basically an image sensor that gets sent over USB and the computer does all the logic. Whereas these will have various sensors and processing capabilities in them to adjust the image quality before it even leaves the camera. That means you're doing less fiddling in OBS, you're doing less fiddling throughout the thing, throughout your whole setup, because your camera is taking care of the image quality. You know, I would say a downside of this is, yes, you're going to need a capture card, but you're still going to need a capture card if you go to a DSLR. You know, if you go absolutely bonkers and you buy a cinema camera or something like that, you're still going to need that capture card. Likewise, you can also buy a camcorder, which is a good competitor for this. Now your camcorders, let's see here. Epiphan actually has a nice article that covers a lot of this stuff. Display capture. So Epiphan is a manufacturer in the audio video market that's used for that. They do AV recording appliances and they also do some streaming. So, you know, they talk about your Logitech C920. They talk about your Microsoft LiveCam, your Brio webcam. The Brio webcam's cool. It actually is 4K capable, but you can also do 1080p 60, you know, in a webcam format. But again, you're dealing with your plastic optics, you're dealing with your 1/4 inch sensor. I don't necessarily want smaller light buckets. I want bigger light buckets. That way my light sensitivity is less. I have a cloudy day in the shop. I have, you know, my ring light or what have you goes out. I want to have something that's going to be able to adapt, you know. You know, you'll see starter budget. Next thing up, they talk about camcorders, your Canon Vixas, your Panasonics. They talk about action cameras. I'm not a fan of action cameras. An action camera is basically a webcam that stands on its own. And I actually kind of prefer the idea of a camcorder over a DSLR for a lot of things. And I'll get back to that in a minute. And then they get into your DSLR and your mirrorless. You know, you can get up to your 80Ds, your Sony a6 300s, your a7 IIs, and then you can get up into your higher end camcorders. And these guys are going to have your DSLR sized sensors, but in a camcorder format. And I actually prefer that much, much more than a DSLR. And we'll talk about that. But you'll notice they don't cover these security cameras. And why is that? Well, they're a little bit more tricky to purchase and select and choose what you want. For example, this one that I have in my hand looks perfectly usable. It's True Vision. It's a nice camera. Problem is, it's IP. This camera streams its video output on its own. Well, that's cool. I just, add a browser source or something to OBS and capture that. Well, the problem is delay. Your audio video sync gets out of sync. I've actually streamed with this exact camera, and the problem is I had to figure out what my audio video delay was and go into my audio settings and video settings and delay all my sources so that everything would sync up. It was hours of frustration and fiddling with it, and just not worth it, because the next time I went to stream, network conditions were slightly different and I had to fiddle with it again. This camera, you'll see it mentions it's 3G HD SDI. And they also have a model here for $50 more that's 3G HD SDI and HDMI. So $50 adds HDMI. Cool. So you can still use your Elgato capture cards and all that. No big deal. It's still $549, and this is just the camera. It doesn't actually include a lens. Well, heck, $500 is expensive, but $500 is still cheaper than this guy, a mirrorless camera. So that's cool, that's handy, but I'm going to need a lens. How much is a lens? Well, this big honkin' lens is, I want to say it was like $400 by itself, or $350 or something if I didn't buy it with the camera. That's pretty expensive. Well, if we get into lenses for these guys, there's a $111. Oh, look, here's a $60 one. We've got 115. They can get up to 250 pretty easy. 320. But you even have them as cheap as $40. So, let's take a look at this. Well, not that one. That's not the one I'm looking for. If I come down here, and I look and look and look, we've got a few different ones. Not seeing the one I want, though. Well, I'm not seeing it listed at the moment, but we look at this $60 one. It's a Fujinon, so it's a Fuji lens. It's a varifocal lens, meaning it's actually zoomable. It has an f1.3 aperture. It's a CS mount. It works with 1/3 and 1/4 inch image sensors. Cool. So this camera with a 1/3 inch image sensor has what will work with this. Now, I don't have this exact lens. I have one that's about $75. And I have that on a similar camera to this one. Not this exact one, but it's very similar. So I'm going to switch back to the DSLR. So I've got my DSLR here. And you can see I don't have a lot of filters or anything set up in OBS, but I've got really good detail in the studio here. You can see all the individual keys pretty clearly. And if I actually get up, you can start to make out the difference in texture on the chair. And since I can't do this with a webcam, I can actually zoom in. And compression's probably going to ruin it. You can actually see the perforations in the seat leather, and you can start to make out the various lettering on the synthesizer here. Yes, and you can see the wood grain. So on a DSLR, that's pretty great. DSLR will also have autofocus, which is a big differentiator. But autofocus isn't always what we want. But you see this guy here. This is a tiny little camera. I mean, it's not as long as my hand. You know, if I put the back of my hand up here, you can see my fingers sticking out the back. You can see just a power cable and one other little SDI cable coming out the back. Well, what's that look like? We're going to go straight from about $3,000 in DSLR camera to about, let's see, about $550 in security camera. It's not bad at all. I mean, you can see it's not quite as crisp, not quite as sharp. It is a smaller image sensor, but I still have good color. You can still see the red of the guitar. You can still make out your keys. It's going to have a little bit more grain, but not as much as the webcam. And I'm actually going to zoom in, and these things do not do autofocus. More of a set it and forget it. But you can zoom in quite a bit, so you can actually see more detail on the bomb. You can see more detail on this. And I can actually, hopefully no one gets nauseous when I do this, get down here to the chair, and if I actually focus it, you can see the perforations on this chair quite cleanly. I mean, for really 1/6 of the price of this DSLR, and really, I mean, to be fair, half the price of your typical DSLR, this is a pretty sweet deal if you don't need autofocus. You just have to deal with manual focus. You can see that's how long it takes to get it close, and then you can hone it in. So if you're not actually going to be moving the camera a ton, and you're going to be putting it in one spot, this is a good option. You know, and that begs the question, okay, DSLR or this thing, how important is autofocus? I think for what Twicker's talking about here, blacksmithing, where you're moving around, autofocus is actually pretty good. Because it's going to help track when you have something close, when you have something far. But if you're doing an overall shot of the shop, and it's just watching you walk around, that's actually not so important. So let's go back to webcam. Well, actually, you know what? So just to iterate this, you know, DSLR, box camera, security camera. There is a notable difference, but it's not as big as people make it out to be. Interestingly, your box camera is going to be comparable to your camcorder. Now, I don't have a camcorder to actually show with, but camcorders are actually pretty nice. Because one thing about DSLRs that I don't like is for a DSLR to be really usable, you either need something with a cam link and you have to worry about the camera self-powering off or something like that. or your DSLR has to be able to record without recording internally. And the reason for that is the EU has a law on the books or a regulation on the books where anything that records video for 30 minutes or longer needs to pay for a license. Yes, you are right, Twicker. Boxcam can take some abuse, and you can put it in an enclosure that will weather seal it. And they're actually intended for, permanent installs. But anyway, back to this regulation. So what a lot of camera companies do is they limit DSLRs to recording to 30 minutes when they're recording internally. So that means every 30 minutes you have to restart the recording. And that can be pain if you're streaming 12 hours. Camcorders don't have that limitation because they're actually designed for that. The Rooster Teeth podcast, for years and years before Rooster Teeth became a larger corporation, was using just Sony camcorders. So a camcorder is going to give you close to box camera, flexibility. It's going to have the same size image sensor. It's going to give you autofocus where box camera will not. The camcorder is also more likely to have just plain HDMI out, and it's usually going to be a little bit cheaper. Well, why do I prefer the box camera over a camcorder, though? Well, for one, camcorders are bigger. They're not really designed to be put somewhere permanently. So if you have a permanent streaming setup, camcorder might not be as useful. Because you'll have to go and you're going to have to fiddle with it. They also tend to not give you all the options that a box camera will get. I haven't shown you, but these cameras have an on-screen menu or a web page or something that you can actually go in and tweak all the image settings on. A camcorder is you get what you get, so you have to go and fiddle with the image settings in OBS. And apples to apples, you're still going to need a capture card. So camcorder might be good, they're available, but I think a lot of people overlook these box cameras because they think, oh, it's a security camera, no one's going to use that. Well, this is these are HD cameras that do 1080p 60, out of the box. You have adjustable optics, you have image quality processing on there. And before I get into interconnects of cameras, I have two more cameras that I want to talk about. First one, this guy, cell phone. I know some people have messed with NDI. It's used a lot in multi-PC streaming setups. There is a small app for NDI. If it ever loads, there it is. And with this, I can actually start streaming off my cell phone direct into OBS. And let's see if it'll pick it up. There it is. So you can actually see on here, there's going to be a little bit of delay because it's coming off a cell phone over Wi-Fi. But hey, I can use my webcam or my phone as a camera. Now again, this sensor is minuscule. It's maybe 1/8 of an inch. It's tiny. So you're not going to get the same quality. Well, my webcam or my camera on my phone is 24 megapixels. No, it's not. they're actually doing image stacking to create that. But you can see up here, there's my C925. It's on top of a tripod. And this is great for when you want to just, yeah. You can use it for, hey, I just want to show this one quick thing. What are we, and all that. But while I'm showing you this, I've got another camera here. And that's this white thing in the frame. And that is a document camera. And I like document cameras, but I'm actually going to be getting rid of this one and replacing it with a box camera. And the reason for that is, even though this document camera is pretty nice, the image quality out of it is not great. So it's great if you're doing a crafting stream or you want to show something up close. I can actually take this box camera, put it in there, and this is the best I've gotten this camera to look, which is one of the issues. And you can see it hunts for focus quite a bit and still doesn't get it quite right. Come on, camera. It's focusing on the background and not the lens. So there it goes. It finally took. So you can get some good close-ups with this thing. And when you want to, show off stuff, it's actually pretty handy. And it even has a little built-in light. The problem with the built-in light is glare. But if I was doing a painting or anything like that, this type of camera is great. It's got a little arm where it sticks out over what you're working on, so you can continue to work on things and, cover whatever subject matter you want to. So that about does it for camera options. But the next thing I want to talk about is interconnects. And that's cool, but you saw, everyone knows what HDMI is. But you saw this guy, he's using SDI. It's got this funky round connector. Is that like an old VCR connector or an old antenna connector or what? Even this guy here has an old connector, or an odd connector on it. So let me get the mic rearranged, and we're going to look at some stuff under the document camera. Cool, so we're back on document camera. Zoom out all the way. And one thing I don't care about care for with this document camera is, the viewable area is not huge. Whereas if I took one of these box cameras and hung it from the ceiling and zoomed in, I could actually get quite a bit more range on what I can show off. So we'll start off with some capture cards. Most everyone's had a capture card. You've seen the Elgato products. This is kind of similar to what I use. I use a lot of products from this company called Magewell. And these are more professional end products. They are a bit more expensive. But this here is a USB 3 HDMI capture card. So you can see I've got HDMI in one end, USB in the other, and it comes with one of these fancy USB cables. It's just like your Elgato USB capture card and all that. The main difference is this guy doesn't require any funky software. Matter of fact, this guy doesn't require any software at all. I don't even have to load drivers. I plug it into a Windows 10 computer or a Macintosh, and it works. It shows up in OBS. I can capture audio on it. I can capture video on it. I don't have to tell it whether it's capturing 720p, 1080, or anything. I just say, hey, I want to capture 1080p off of this, and it goes. And they make various forms of it. So they have a 4K variant. They have plus variants that include loop through and all that. And then they also have this guy here, which is SDI. So that SDI camera, I actually capture, SDI video. And it just has a little cable that plugs in the end. And likewise, this is an SDI capture card. They also make this with HDMI. And the HDMI doesn't have a loop through, but it has the ability to input analog video. So, again, it has this funky connector. Well, why am I talking about SDI? This is all higher end stuff that I don't necessarily have to mess with. It has this funny cable that looks a lot like the old cable TV cable, but it has this weird twisty connector that looks like an old antenna connector. Well, HDMI, this guy here, really is only intended to go 25 feet tops. This little cable's a big 18 inches, but it's really only intended to go 25 feet. And the connector can come unplugged easily. Someone trips over the cable, you obviously would want it to come out, but it's a big, bulky connector, and it only goes so far. SDI can go 300 feet. No problem. Just making sure that you have the right type of cable. The connectors actually lock on. So if I can zoom in a bit more and get it in focus, I actually take this connector and slide it on, and then I actually twist it, and it's actually locked in place. And there's nothing getting this off unless you untwist it and pull. Now this is a brand new connector, so it's extra snug. Yes, you are correct, Twicker. You can move your camera around and not worry about it. So I like SDI a lot. SDI also enables a few other things, such as the use of one of these boxes. And this is just one example of one. This is, can I get it in there? A switcher. I actually have 4 inputs, and I have both a quad view output and just a program output. And I can hook up 4 cameras to this and just hit a button to switch between the various inputs. It's kind of like your old ka-chunk, but with a nice one of these, it'll switch between cameras without having to touch OBS or anything. So if you're in a situation where you want to stream from a shop and you want to keep the computer out of the shop, you put your cameras in here in the shop, you put one of these in there, and then you run the output of this to the PC in the other room. And you don't have to worry about your PC getting dirty or dusty. Now, these are expensive. You know, I want to say they start at $1,000 and go up, but it is an option. Well, cool. You know, SDI sounds great. It's nice, but you need to have specialized cables, and you need to have, you know, a specialized capture card, and, you know, I'm not sure if I want that, because I also want to just hook up a camcorder or my PS4 or something like that, and I don't want to have to spend a bunch of money for an extra capture card. Well, I got you covered. Blackmagic makes these little boxes. They're about $40, and it takes SDI input and outputs HDMI. They also make boxes that go the other direction, where I can take an HDMI camcorder and output SDI. So $40, you have an adapter. Well, it might be a little bit more than that, because you do need to have a micro USB power supply. But these things are pretty handy. Well, if I still haven't sold you on SDI, because you still don't like the cables and stuff, the cables do have some limitations. For example, the longer the cable goes, the less you want to bend it. Actually, putting a kink in this cable can practically ruin it. You know, what if I wanted to do something different, and I wanted to do HDMI, or even SDI for that matter? What else can I do? Well, I mean, there are the cheap HDMI over Ethernet adapters, like this OREI one that I picked up off Amazon for, I think, $25-30. So it takes, let's see here, this is the input module. The output module is actually in a rack under my desk. But it takes HDMI in, and then it goes out over a network cable. And, you know, network cables can be up to 300 feet, no problem. Well, these guys don't really want to go over 300, or go up to 300 feet. These guys sometimes don't even like to go 50 feet. You know, they're cheap. But if you're just looking to go from one room to another, and it's within 50 or 100 feet or whatever it's rated, it's probably okay. You know, and this one even has a built-in splitter, so I can actually plug in a PS4, plug in the TV to this, and then send this out to the streaming PC, so I can stream whatever's on the PS4. Handy and dirt cheap. But then you can say, well, I want something a bit more than that, you know. That's great, but it's just not working out for me. And there are a number of companies that make these. But it's the same basic principle. These aren't going over the network. They're just using network cables. But this is a Hall Research HDMI over UTP sender. And there's obviously a UTP receiver component as well. But this is using a technology called HDBaseT. And it's actually a pretty cool technology. This guy is using its own special sauce. So this sender and receiver basically match up. I can't use another company's thing with it. This guy, because it's using HDBaseT, that is a standard, I can have a Hall Research item on one end and an Atlona or a Kramer or some other brand item at the other to receive it. I can also use this for conversion. So this could be HDMI input and VGA and analog audio output, technically. So it will actually do conversion between them. Now these guys are expensive. These guys are more like $300. But these guys will also go 150 plus feet, 300 feet, no issue. They are actually designed for that. You know, if I'm just trying to go across the room, my $25, $30 item works no problem. If I'm trying to go across a building, this is what I want. But if 300 feet is not long enough, what can I do? And what you can do, and I'm going to look weird in this, but I can go back to my display capture, and with how we used the NDI, the NewTek NDI stuff on my cell phone, they make these converters that take HDMI in or SDI in or what have you and convert it to Ethernet. Now this is a genuine network stream of the HDMI over an actual network. So this has to actually be plugged into, you know, a switch or something like that. But I can have this anywhere in a building and receive it anywhere else in the building, so long as I can talk network to it. Again, these guys start at like $350, but it's another technology that can be used. And there are other technologies we can use as well, but those are the most prevalent right now. I do recommend staying away from like IP cameras. I do recommend, if you can, getting away from webcams and other cheap cameras. Simply because they don't give you the dynamic range you need. Yes, if you're using a VPN, you could use NDI still. The problem is NDI, well, it's not NDI. It's VPNs tend to be rather bandwidth restricted. So if you can get appropriate traffic across the VPN, you know, if it has enough bandwidth down that VPN tunnel, NDI should work just fine. So I'm going to switch over real quick. I'm going to readjust my mic. And I will be back in 1 to 2 minutes. And we're going to talk about some microphones. I know Corn's excited about that. I've got a toy right here. So I will be Okay, let's see here. All right. So, microphone adjusted. I've had my drink of water and all that. So, let's talk about microphones a bit. You know, got your standard handheld mic here. Not really good for streaming, but it gets by in a pinch. They come in wired and wireless flavors. No big deal. You know, I'm right here. I'm actually using an MXL 990 right now. And that is this guy on Amazon. It's an XLR condenser microphone. So I actually have to have a XLR cable going into an audio interface like this. You know, this is a Scarlett i2i or 2i2 or whatever it is. I'm actually going into a Motu interface for this guy at the moment. Just something I had laying around. But basically something that's going to take a microphone, convert it to USB so I can capture it in OBS. Most of these guys are all the same. When you get into certain devices like the 2i2, the third gen has an air function which gives you a little bit of an EQ. The Motu is pretty straight. I have some Roland Octacaptures that has like built-in compression and stuff. But they're almost all the same unless they have compression or effects built in. The big difference is going to be brand, software, and the number of inputs. So my Octacaptures are 10 input, 10 output. This guy is 2 input, 2 output. My Motu device, I think, is 6 input, 8 output. So they're all a little bit different, and it's really going to depend upon how many mics you need or how many line or microphone inputs you need. But so I'm using this MXL 990. You could see Amazon Prime, $75. That's dirt cheap. Guitar Center and Sweetwater and all these various places used to be like, hey, if you spend over $200 with us, you get a free MXL 990 mic. It's actually a pretty decent mic. I think it sounds decent. Is it the most clear mic in the world? No. But for most everything you do, it's okay. But it is a condenser microphone, as is the most popular streamer microphone in the world, the AT2020, and the second most popular streamer microphone in the world, although it tries to claim it's the number one, the Yeti. Notice that they say number one USB microphone. So your AT2020 is usually around $100, $120. Your Yeti is around $130, so same basic price. But it is also a condenser microphone. As such, it's going to be somewhat sensitive to noise. It's kind of handy because I can, come back here and you could still hear me quite clearly. I can face this way and you could still hear me. So that's pretty handy. But if my door was open behind me, you could also hear the people outside of the room. That's not so handy. If the AC was going and blowing directly on this thing, you could hear that. As a matter of fact, let me mute this real quick. If I take... Oh, I gotta go back a quit. If I take the filter off of this guy, it sounds a bit different, and oh my goodness, background noise will come through so much clearer. So you really need one of these filters on there. So options to move away from that, yeah, Twicker's got a great point. You're clickety clackety. If I'm sitting here and I'm typing and that's pretty obnoxious. So options. Well, the next step up used to be that you'd go up to either an EV mic or a Shure SM7B. Now, this is a very, very nice mic. You see these in radio studios all over the world. They're used in podcasts. They are XLR only, which means you do have to buy one of these preamps, one of these audio interfaces. But this mic is also $400. That's not great, but it's what we call a dynamic mic. And dynamic mics are not nearly as sensitive. So you're going to see down here, this guy is practically kissing this microphone, talking into it. And you're going to see that just about everywhere that this gets used. They are right up on this microphone. Yeah, that's something we have to watch for. It means that the use of like one of these microphone boom arms is going to become much more imperative. I've got this mic right here on a desktop stand mic, and I can't use it as my main mic because I would be leaning over like this, and that would not be fun. So, okay, I can put it, right here, right in front of me, and yeah, that's not comfortable. I can't see my keyboard, I can't, hold the mouse and all that. So it really, something like this has to go on an arm. Have fun, Twicker, I'll see you. So, you can also go for a lavalier mic. And those are your typical mics that you see buttoned on someone's shirt. And they're actually really, really clear. The problem is that the mic is attached to the person. If you go wireless like this is the exact microphone setup I have for using in the shop. Well, you only get about 2 hours out of the batteries. So if I've got a 4-hour stream going, that's 2 sets of batteries. That's not great. Well, I could go wired, but then I'm literally tethered to the streaming setup. Whereas now I can get up, I can walk around and all that. You might not be able to hear me if I'm not in front of the microphone, but I'm not physically connected to the streaming setup. So lavaliers kind of are a love it and hate it thing. You eat through batteries or you basically have a leash. Well, Shure last month came out with this MV7. And it's kind of the SM7B's little brother. And you could see they're right in front of the microphone once again. So it is a dynamic mic. I have confirmed it, and I will switch to it here in a minute. So hold your horse's corn. But this guy, let's see here. Let me see if I can unscrew it and put it under the document camera so you can actually see it. overhead camera. Let's zoom out of it. So this guy is physically a little bit smaller than the SM7B. You can see across the top, it has a touchpad where you can actually adjust the microphone volume. You can also switch between headphone and microphone to adjust that. So when I switch this, those LEDs actually turn orange to say, hey, I'm in that. I can actually mute the mic on the microphone. And if we switch to the back, I actually have a headphone jack, an XLR, and a USB. And right now, I just have the USB plugged in. I haven't actually confirmed it yet, but it does appear as though the adjustments on the app actually do apply to the XLR as well. But I have not confirmed that as of yet. All right, so we're going to bring this back if it lets me. All right, there we go. And all right, so back to display, and it actually has an app here where I can switch to auto level. I can mute and unmute the mic from the app, and it does reflect on the screen, on the microphone itself. You know, if I'm using headphones, I can adjust my mix. You can also adjust how far you intend to use the microphone from where you're sitting. And then it has a tone control, dark, natural, bright. And all this is an EQ control, just like this is a gain control. It's just doing some automatic magic for you. Or you switch over to manual, and you can actually do that. And you can actually see with this, the LEDs on top of the mic move with it as well. If you actually look in the top corner there, you can see the LEDs go up and down as I adjust the gain. Likewise, I do this. It doesn't actually show the LEDs. They actually go to a different mode. You can select from 4 preset EQs. So flat, high pass, presence boost, which just gives you a bump in the mid-range, and presence boost plus high pass. It'll also have a built-in limiter and a built-in compressor. So I played with it a little. I haven't really gone in and tweaked this mic, but this is about the settings that I found that I'm liking right now. So let me see here. We'll do the full webcam. I'm actually going to pull this over so that the mics are side by side. So one thing I'm going to do right now is I'm talking into the microphone, and I'm actually going to go to the side of the microphone, and you can see I don't have too big of a drop off. You know, I can even face away from it a bit, and you can still hear and understand me quite clearly. Likewise, typing on the keyboard. Now if I switch mics, There we go. I had the microphone muted. So I actually need to turn this microphone up. And so I'm talking at the same distance, and I'm talking straight into the microphone, and it's more or less the same. So I'm actually going to go off axis here, and you can actually hear the drop off, and it's substantially quieter on the drop off. You can still hear the keyboard, but again, this microphone is literally inches from the keyboard. But from what I was hearing, it actually sounds fairly similar to my MXL 990. It just has a decent little clarity to it, where the MXL definitely is a bit bass heavier. This guy is not as bass heavy, which is something I actually expected looking at the response curves on it. But it is a bit more accurate and a bit more it's accurate and clear and true to the sound. How hard am I hitting on the keys? I mean, let me give you a comparison. I was actually hitting them pretty hard. I wasn't pounding, but I was hitting pretty hard. And this is a Corsair, what is it? K95 speed or whatever. It's Cherry MX speed switches. But if I actually go here, I'm just gonna, do some math. And then switching back to the other microphone, if I can find it, there it is. So switching back to the other microphone, likewise, I'm gonna do the same. Just looking at the VU meters, I can actually tell that the MXL, my condenser microphone, is going to be quite a bit more sensitive, and it's going to pick up quite a bit more. That said, on the MV7, you really, really, really are going to have to make sure that you are right up to this microphone. If I come back here, you can see that it's dropping off substantially. So it really, really wants you to be close to the mic. So much so that, here I am 5 inches from the mic, and this is about the proper speaking distance for me. Whereas with the MXL, I'm actually back here leaning and talking normally, and I don't have to do it. This guy, I'm actually going to have to drag the mic to and from me. Is it on the near or far for the settings? I'm actually, here I am. I'm actually on the manual. So let me do this. I'm going to switch to the auto level. And it's on near right now. So I am like 2 inches from the mic, and this is about where I want my level at. So I'm going to sit back, and I'm going to keep talking while I do this, and you can see it drops off quite a bit. So I really, really, really need that arm. So here we're going to go up to the front, and we're going to hit far, and it's about the same level right now, but I should be able to, I'm going back, and it's not dropping off as rapidly. So, but yes, it is a huge fall off. But I mean, here I am. I'm still able to peek into the reds, and I'm consistently in the yellows, where on the near, I wasn't even hitting the yellows at this angle. And I go back here, and I'm still in the yellow. So it does look like it might be doing a little bit of automatic gain, but not as much as you might expect. So switching back to the manual, this is definitely more where I would want it. So this enables the compressor a bit, and I do enable the limiter. And I do have that fall off, and it's just a little bit louder than the far setting. Things I do like about this mic, I do like how it's very clear which end you're supposed to speak in. You know, with the AT2020, I was actually talking to the guys at Audio Technica about this. The AT2020, boy, this is hard to do right in front of the mic. I really would have to adjust the arm. They actually put the label and wording on it to make sure that you're speaking into the front of the microphone on newer revisions, because so many people were talking into it backwards and then complaining about it. On my MXL 990 here, it actually has the MXL printed on various places around the microphone, so I can't count on that. So I actually have to look at the XLR cable going into the bottom to determine which side is the front. Not really that useful. You know, the Blue Yeti, it's pretty easy to figure out. SM7B, obviously, it's easy to figure out, but it is nice to see that. I also like being able to adjust gain on the microphone as I go, and if I didn't have my own set of headphones or what have you, if I was doing like a podcast or talk show, having headphones in the back of the mic is really nice. I'm also noticing that if I actually hit the limiter, the LED for the microphone will switch to red so that I can see that I'm speaking too loudly. I do like having the mute button on here, but there is one problem with this. And it's that you have to touch the microphone to do the gain adjustment. You have to touch the microphone to do the mute, which isn't too bad if you're careful, but as I'm adjusting it, you can actually hear me fiddle with the microphone as I'm recording, which isn't great. So, you know, I'm talking here and I want to turn down a little and I'm going to talk a little bit softer, but if I'm not careful with it, you're actually going to hear my finger on the microphone. So I've turned it down quite a bit. That should be, what, 27? Oh, 31.5. So yeah, we're going down a little bit. And they probably expect most people to use this setting down here because I'm an inch away from the microphone and people like to chew on their microphones for some reason. So mixed review there, but all in all, I think it's really good for a voiceover mic. I think it's really good for streaming to actually filter out a lot of that background noise. The downside is, yes, you need an arm, and you need a good arm. And yes, if you're going to move around in your chair, it's going to be noticeable if you are not in front of that microphone. So you're going to be very tied to it. So I think for what I'm doing, I'm going to stick with the MXL for the time being, even though I like the sound of this. You know, I don't really have a background noise issue. So switching back to the MXL. There we go. And I'm back to the MXL, and I'm back here, and I can, boy, stop leaning over this mic, because otherwise I would have to bring my arm right here. Would the MV7 be good for you? I think the MV7 would be good for just about anyone, but keep in mind, Korn, I think for background noise cancellation, it's great because it is a dynamic. I think if you move around a lot and you're not going to be facing the mic and it would not be as good. So I don't sit and watch how you're sitting in your chair as you're playing your game. I don't know what type of arm you have or stand you have. Those are the things that you need to figure out. Is it worth it to me to have that microphone right here the whole time? And am I going to be able to keep it there? If you're not able to keep it there, it might actually be a problem for you, and it might be just look at getting one of these MXLs for $75. I mean, that's pretty cheap. They've been around for over a decade and they work real well. Now, when it comes to your monitor arms or your microphone arms, there are tons of options and they're all different. The only one that I really like, without going into hundreds and hundreds of dollars, is this Blue Compass. And you'll note that this arm here is not a Blue Compass. This is some other brand that I bought from Adorama. And this mic arm was like $80 or something like that. And I like it, just not as much as the Compass. And what the Compass has is, let's see here, are there good specs on it? Is it doesn't have a built-in cable. Yeah, there we go. It has a actual channel for the cable to go in. But it also is a solid microphone arm like this, where it is a tube and all the springs and mechanisms are internal. So as I move the microphone arm, you're not hearing the springs scrunching and stretching and all that. It's very solid. Another thing this thing has that this boom arm right here doesn't is tension adjustment and the capability to drill a hole in your desk and actually attach it that way. This guy here only clamps on the desk. It does not have tension adjustment, and the cable is internal. If I'd done a little bit more research, I just would have bought the Blue instead, but this works fine for me. So I would definitely look at that. The Rode PS1 microphone arm is good. It's just not what I want right now. It's not, for the $10 or $20 difference between this and the Compass, the Compass wins. And the PS1 is the old style external spring tension, microphone arm, and it has a tendency to pinch cables and stuff like that. I'm just not a huge fan. If I was going to go to anything above the Compass, what is it? Yeah, the Yellowtech Mika arms. But for these, you're looking at hundreds of dollars. They even have it for cameras, but you can see these are very nice. They even have like on-air lights built in and stuff like that. But I could not justify $500 for a microphone arm. They are nice, but that is a lot of money. So, do we have any questions or anything before I end this? Figure out what we're going to be doing, who we're going to raid, and all that jazz? Yes, it is a ton of money for a mic arm. But if you're in a radio studio and you're going to have guests coming in all the time, you're going to be moving it all the time, it makes a lot of sense. And with you not moving in your chair a lot, and you do have a boom arm, MV7 all the way. No question if you're concerned about background noise. I'm not concerned about background noise, so I'm going to stick with this for the time being. But down the road, I probably would have done. So you might have missed this. What might have you missed? DAC or mixer with compression? Oh boy. So a digital audio converter or a audio interface really is, they come in two generalized flavors. You have your DAC, which is, your Scarlett, which it doesn't really do any mixing. But it's very nice. I do prefer hardware compression. Now let me see if I can get this out here. I've got my portable streaming setup under the desk. But then you get into much bigger, heavier duty audio interfaces. All right, which one's the front? Such as what I have here, which in the second rack unit from the top, that is a Roland Octacapture. It looks like a DAC. It looks like your standard audio interface, but it has a built-in mixer. Ultimately, it also has a built-in compressor. So, which is better? It really depends upon your use. So, you can also get these guys with compressors built in, because your compressor is typically done on the input side, not on the mixer side. And I believe that is how the newer Roland, I think they're Rubrics? Let's take a look. Display capture. Products. Don't think it's under professional AV, but let's take a look. No. Yeah, it's Rubix. So if you actually look at these Rubix, so here's the Rubix 22. And this is just your basic audio DAC. If you look at the Rubix 24, this guy actually has a compressor limiter built in. So something like this is, for streaming, this is kind of what I would prefer. Our Focusrite Scarletts, our Roland Octacaptures, our Rubix, or something like that. I would prefer that for streaming. When you get into things like your mixers, like your, let's look at even not a cheap one. Let's look at something a little bit more expensive than your basics. You get into these like Z10FXs and stuff. This is an actual mixer. Unless you really, 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 really want these knobs for EQ. Most of your audio interfaces have a gain knob right here on the front. So that replaces this guy here. You're probably not going to be using, these master outputs. You're probably going to be using the USB output or something. So I don't really see much need for this, because then you're streaming. You're not wanting to mix while you stream. You're wanting to stream while you stream. So when you deal with something like this, if you're recording from the master out or using your master out as your input, you then have to worry about your mix. Whereas for me, it's much easier to look at the at OBS and actually go with it. Oh, this Z8, it's so cute. Now, one thing you guys don't typically get to see, and if you want the best of both worlds, you get one of these bigger audio interfaces that do mixing. I would say an audio interface with a compressor is better than one without a compressor, but if you're looking for something that just works and you don't want to spend a fortune, just stick with the Scarlett. They are generally the best ones for the money. But you guys haven't actually gotten to see this. And, when we look at these mixers, that's cool and all, and people are like, oh, I can go bigger time and hook up more stuff. At that point, just get a bigger interface, because if I switch over to my NDI and come over here, you can actually see here in this deep dark corner of the studio that's not focusing. There it is. I have a large 24 channel professional mixer. Why is it in the corner? Why is it not in use? Well, besides it being big and heavy, it sounds awesome. I don't need it. I really don't. It eats up a lot of room, and an interface or a DAC with the mixer built in does everything I need. And unless I am, for someone like me who's doing music production, I am using that mixing function so that I can listen to the audio from several sources out of my monitors, my studio monitors. But if I'm just looking to get it into OBS, nah, just get a DAC. That's all you need. Even then, if I really was on a budget where I didn't want to spend the money for an Octacapture, Windows has the capability, and even OBS has the capability of mixing all this together. It's just that there would be a delay. So while we're here, let's say you want something a bit nicer than your 2i2. Well, I'm using the Octacapture. So these are the interfaces that I use. They don't make them anymore, but here is one on reverb.com in very good condition. And yes, that is very good condition. I mean, yeah, there's scratches and dirt, but who cares? But it's $300. This thing sounds good. It works really well. You know, heck, if someone wants to help me get one of these, I'd be willing to part with one or two of my Octacaptures. Because this is its big brother. It's 16 in, 10 out. But I'm not spending $850 or $600 or whatever for an audio interface when I have ones that work just fine. But these guys all do built-in mixing. And quite a few of them still do that. Oh wow, December 19th of last year. Or December of last year. So there are plenty of interfaces out there that do mixing that you can look at. Some of the, I think the Clarets might do it, the Focusrite Clarets. You know, you could go really crazy, go into like a 24 channel Tascam. I mean, that's a sweet deal for what it is. You know, these Motu ultralights, I don't think I'd spend that much for one of these. But some of these Motus actually do have mixing. So this microphone is in a Audio Express. So if I do a $11 available from $200. It's a 6x6 audio interface. So here's $200. This person can't take pictures, but this guy does mixing too. Does not have built-in compression, but it does USB and FireWire, 2 microphone preamps. And it sounds pretty good, and you've got a nice little set of meters and stuff on the front. And this guy will actually mix audio separate. Yes, Motu is better for Mac than Windows. I actually do not recommend Motu for Windows in general. But, you know, if you can fight with it and get it working, it works nice. So you can definitely look on Reverb and see all the various options out there. It's a shame some of my favorite brands no longer make things, but I mean, got Universal Audio. DigiDesign is much more suited to Mac. M Audio is kind of a zombie brand these days. Sound devices. Wow. I actually know these guys pretty well. They're based out of the Chicago area. They make really neat products. But this is more of a field recorder setup. But you can go through a bunch of these, and a lot of them will have built-in mixing. And you can pick up a nice audio interface used for a relatively good price. But honestly, if you're using the Scarlett, I'd just stick with it, dude. Just stick with it. I don't think an Atari Lynx is an audio interface, but whatever. $18i2. Boy, this person wants a lot of money for something that's not worth that much. But whatever. So yeah. Okay, you've got the Solo. The Solo is fine unless you need more than one input. My general rule of thumb is unless it's very specific for a use, so like my 2i2 I bought for portable use, always buy a slightly bigger one than you need unless you're on a tight budget. So like if I was buying a 2i2 for at home and I only needed 2 inputs, I'd probably buy the 4i4 or whatever it is, just so I have 2 extra inputs. All right. So let's see who is online. I know it's not important right now, but you know, even with 2 viewers, a raid's a raid. Gats is not streaming yet, so only person I have on my list that's streaming. Only person I care to give to is Ray. And yeah, I don't think he needs me rating with 949 viewers right now. 949 viewers right now. But yeah, cool. Hopefully this was educational for you, Corn. Hopefully you liked listening to the mic. I am gonna go ahead and end. I am gonna go ahead and end. I am gonna go ahead and end. I am gonna go ahead and end.